It's a special business morning today because it's budget day in Nigeria. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. We'll still do our 55 minutes of current and relevant business conversation. But for today, we're going to focus on the budget. As we all know by now, President Bola Tinubu is expected to present the 2026 spending plan to the joint House of lawmakers later on today. We await that, obviously, and so we're building up to that. Looking at the 2025 budget as the year rolls out, the spending, especially some of those issues raised during the year. I know the biggest of that is the one by the Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy, that 70% of 2025 spending is going to be rolled to 2026. And then we saw the President Bola Tinubu follow up on that, asking for repeal of 2024-2025 budget so we would end this era of multiple budgets in a particular fiscal year. We haven't had updates on that. It's just been presented by the President to the lawmakers. And of course, there are so many processes to go through. And we've had bodies like the CPP asking that those reforms in our budgetary system, they should be accelerated so that we have a more certain spending plan and revenue. And then we'll also look at the parameters that is being used. What are those ones that were used for 2025? How realistic were they at the end of the day? What about the revenue? What has happened to oil prices? Do we factor the global factors, the geopolitical factors into the pricing? Does that help? How real has it been? The plan for total expenditure, the plan for capital expenditure, how much of that has really come into fruition at the end of the year? I mean, it's December. How many more days or weeks do we have before the end of the year? These are issues that the panel will be discussing on the program today. So it's going to be a different look for business morning, but it's still current and relevant business conversations. That's still what we'll be having, even though we're looking at the budget. And of course, we'll be standing by once the President is ready to present that to the lawmakers. Of course, we'll be bringing that to you. So first of all, let's look at some of those numbers connected to the budget to prepare the ground for the conversations we'll be having. First of all, let's start with the 2025 budget breakdown. Of course, for 2025, we all know the numbers by now. Total expenditure was placed at 54.99 trillion naira. Our revenue target was 41.81 trillion naira. And that leaves the deficit of 13.08 trillion naira. Now, you want to compare that deficit to the debt stock as at the end of the second quarter of 2025, which was at 152.40 trillion naira. My guest later on will help us break down some of this. So we look at the expected deficit and then we compare it to the debt stock that we have. Capital expenditure, we see, was at 23.96 trillion. I believe I have that now. Right? So 2025 budget, there we have it. Total expenditure was placed at 54.99 at the beginning of the year, of course, concluded by the end of 2024. Revenue target 41.81, budget deficit 13.03. But of course, we saw that as at the second quarter of 2025, our debt stock was at 152.4. Capital expenditure was proposed for 23.96. We'll see a bit of what has been done when it comes to capital expenditure for the year. Debt servicing, 14.31. We'll also see the actual number of debt servicing and the debt status later on in some of the other slides. Recurrent, that's non-debt expenditure, was at 13.6 trillion. Now, let's look at the parameters that were used in 2025 to set that expected budget, revenue and expenditure. So we see that oil price was expected to be at $75 a barrel. But of course, we know even as at this week, we had less than $60 a barrel. So obviously that revenue target cannot be hit. Oil production was proposed at 2.06 trillion. we struggled to stay above 1.6. And I remember us celebrating a couple of times when we were able to do 1.5, but we're supposed to have 2 million or more than 2 million if we're to hit that revenue target and have that level of deficit. So I guess we now see some of this explanation as to why our deficit or our debt, we had to borrow more than that deficit. The exchange rate was proposed at 1,400. The best we have done is, about less than 1.5, about that. GDP growth 4.6, I believe we've done that. We're able to hit that. Inflation is currently at 14.45 as at November. So we have also hit that. I guess we can say these are the 2 hits that we've had in the year 2025. Talking about those infrastructure and all of that, and how much was proposed for it. We saw the Lagos Coastal Road. Of course, that made a whole lot of noise this year. So infrastructure, you have the highways, railways, power grid. The Lagos Coastal Road was one. Partial part of it has been opened. A guest of mine told me how he did just about 20 minutes going between Ajah to Victoria Island. That's a miracle in Lagos. And he did it this week when we know that traffic is high. So that's part of the coastal road that has been opened. So that's part of your money there, 4.06 trillion naira. We also had the Sokoto Badagry Super Highway, similar to the coastal road. We had the solarization of initiative that was launched to deploy solar infrastructure to 75.5 million Nigerians. Well, we don't know how many Nigerians really have been hit with that. We also had, of course, a lot of spending on defense and security. There's a lot of changes in that aspect this year. Education, also, Minister Lausa has been in our faces, telling us some of those things, and as well as Minister Pate. We've heard a whole lot going on in those 2 sectors. So school infrastructure, teacher training, primary healthcare. A lot of programs have come out of primary healthcare in this year, and local drug production. And then when we come to talking about the debt, remember we talked about debt earlier, what we expected as deficit, obviously lower than what we've had at the end of it. So we saw total public debt at 152.40 by the end of the second quarter. Debt servicing that was used between January and July, we had about 9.81 trillion. External debt servicing between January and August 2005 stood at $2.86 dollar. And domestic, we know the government was very active this year in the domestic markets. We had a lot of auctions of securities, and they've spent so far by the second quarter 1.7 trillion naira. So we still have issues of those reforms which the president is asking for. 70% rollover, that obviously is a worrying one. Multiple budgets in 1 year, that is a worrying one. Low level of implementation of the budget, also another worrying one. We'll be dissecting all of this with a panel of economists in a few minutes. Please stay with us.
So, this is what we've become.
As the head of this room, you spoke to me.
Preach peace!
You see the way you're talking to me.
If you respect yourself, I'm not going to respect you.
Say you see the way you're talking.
How am I talking to you? Look what you've done to me. There is no peace for the wicked. Do you understand me? Beat me. Oh yeah, beat me. We die here.
What if you could spot early signs of intimate partner violence before marriage or early in your marriage? Introducing IRIS, Nigeria's first assessment platform, developed with licensed counselors and psychologists to help identify and prevent intimate partner violence. Are you a religious center ready to help your members build healthy marriages? Call 0810-284-2542. The IRIS assessment. Take the test, spot the signs, stop the violence. Powered by Citizens Gavel.
welcome back. Well, I was supposed to have a full house in here, but the traffic in Lagos started pretty early this year, so some of my guests are stuck in traffic. Hopefully, they can get to the studio before the end of the program, but thank God for technology and ICT. So they're joining us virtually. We have joining us the founder and chief consultant of B. Adedipe. Now he's a professor of practice at the James Hope University. He's teaching economic policy. Dr. Biodun Adedipe, we must say congratulations, on this new level that you're on. And thank you so much for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Great.
Yeah.
And then we have the CEO of Budgets. We know him very well. Mr. Seun Onigbide joins us also virtually. The man with the numbers is going to dissect all those numbers and give us forecasts. Welcome to the program.
It's a pleasure being here. Thank you so much.
And then we have the founder and principal partner at Gbenga Adeoye & Co., Mr. Gbenga Adeoye. Mr. Adeoye, good morning. Welcome to the program.
Good morning. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here virtually.
Virtually. Well, we hope we can get you in the studio before the program runs out. And that was the initial plan. All right.
On the way in traffic.
Yeah, and then we also have Dr. Muda Yusuf, the Chief Executive Officer of Center for Promotion of Private Enterprises. Dr. Yusuf, good morning. Okay, I guess he's also on the way, so hopefully we'll either get him physical or virtual before the program comes to an end. But so, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining in the program. I wonder if you're able to catch some of those numbers, but I mean, you already have them. Talking about the proposals for spending and revenue for 2025 and how much of that we're able to hit or to miss. Let me start with the man with the numbers, Mr. Onigbide. You guys deal a whole lot at Budget with numbers. So tell us, how much hits and how much miss do we have recorded for 2025 from the budget?
Thank you so much. If you look at the 2025 budget, it felt like as if it was a budget that was doomed from the beginning in some sort of way. You would see that the revenue assumptions were not realistic. This project itself suffered from budget credibility from the start. And I think it came from the windfall of 2024. Federal government revenue rose from 12 trillion naira in 2023 to 20 trillion naira in 2024. And I guess someone just doubled the numbers and just assumed that they are going to be able to hit 40 trillion naira in 2025. Unfortunately, it's not going that direction. We have been asking that the federal government present details of the 2025 budget performance. And I guess the challenge is because the capital component of the budget is yet to begin. It's yet to be delivered as it should be. But if you look at the MTF document that was released a few weeks ago, the 2025 provisional performance up to July 2025 was shown in that document. And you will see that revenues around 13 trillion naira around July 2025, expenditures around 20 trillion naira around July 2025. It tracks with what exactly the revenue has been before. Oil revenue is significantly underperforming. So the first problem that budget suffered was from a credibility perspective. The other thing you also see is that there is no capital efficiency. The budget was around 10 trillion naira was added to the budget by the National Assembly, which also just speaks to how we need to carry some level of fiscal discipline when it comes to the budget. And everybody threw whatever they had into that budget, believing that it was their pot of money, understanding that that might possibly even be the last realistic budget as we move towards the next election. Unfortunately, those projects have not been funded because largely the 2025 budget has not been funded by the federal government. So that creates a chaos in that direction in terms of what National Assembly put in and what has not been funded. And I think those are the two major problems we see in the budget. And it's just certain evidence of our structural fiscal issues. Yeah.
So, Mr. Onigbide, you bring up the issue of credibility. Let me ask Dr. Adedipe, Your perspective about the performance of the 2025 budget, would you be following the line of Mr. Onigide says the issue of credibility stands out?
Well, thank you so very much. I think data informs you what to say about an issue. And what Shane has done is to bring out the data and what the data is saying. So I told the same line, and that is coming from the first consideration when you evaluate a budget, either as a proposal or you now evaluate its execution. All right? Everything runs around your assumptions and how realistic they are. So clearly, and we are going also in that same process, unfortunately, with the 2026 budget. And why do I say that? Now you get to a point in the conversation where obviously the realities of the environment where you want to implement this budget tell you something else than what you are actually adopting. And so what I say then is that the process itself lacks some measure of credibility, as you said, which means how you arrive at those numbers that are the major assumptions that drive your figures in the budget becomes even more important than the numbers themselves. If you get the process right, the numbers will turn out right. So there's a big credibility issue in terms of how we do our budget.
Oh, that's worrying. That's another question of credibility there. But let me ask Mr. Adeoye. Mr. Adeoye, do you also see a big question of credibility on our budget and the processes, which brings up the numbers? Hello, Mr. Adeoye.
Okay. Yes, I'm with you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
I think I'll use another word. It's the word trust by the general citizen. In the past, when you listen to budget on radio, you are sure this is the line that the government is going to go. So private sector, investors, banks, they plan according to the budget. But in a situation, because as I was growing up, budget is a major declaration every year that determines your direction. But now I feel so sad that budget is now a mere paper. Like what we say in law, that an unsigned document is a useless piece of paper. Budget has now become useless where it becomes unrealistic, you can't implement it, and then carrying over as much as 70% of your capital expenditure into another year. In fact, it negates the law because Appropriation Act is what you call budget. Once it is signed, you have to adhere to it.
All right. I wonder if we have Dr. Muda Yusuf now. He's also on the road. Dr. Yusuf, can you hear me? Hello, Dr. Yusuf. All right. I guess the network on the road is not allowing him join us. So let me just go around again. So we have this issue of credibility, but really when we look at the level of implementation for this year, one thing stands out, the statement of the minister, the coordinating minister of the economy, when he said that 70% of the 2025 will be rolled over. But I guess that's not the first time, because this year we had 2024 budget, we had 2025 budget, we had the supplementary budget running at the same time. Let me ask Mr. Adeoye, you are the accountant here. How does it work when you have 3 spending and revenue plans running in one fiscal year? How does it work, really?
Actually, it doesn't make sense, to be honest with you. But when you have crisis, I think what the Minister of Finance and the President has come to do is to do what I call damage control. To say, okay, there's no point bringing up a new plan when the existing plan we have for 2025 is yet to be implemented. So that's basically what rollover means. Rollover means I couldn't perform what I promised, and so don't give me another assignment. Let me face the existing one. That's the best way to explain what has happened. And again, it brings out the issue of trust. Because if you say we are doing Sokoto Road from Badagry. Investors are already planning. Real estate investors are planning. People who want to supply granite, they're already taking facility to buy trucks. Different services. People are already planning. Banks are already rolling out product on how to grant loans, facility to people. Companies are already thinking of how to employ more people. And so when you fail to perform, you do not only affect the government, but you are causing trouble for the private sector. So, in a way, rolling over a budget of 1 year to another simply means I have failed to perform, and so don't give me another assignment. Let me focus on the assignment you gave me for 2025, which makes sense to an extent, is an honest decision, in my view.
All right, Dr. Muda, do we have you now?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank God, at least we can hear your voice. Well, we hope we can see you before the program comes to an end. So I had gotten the views of other panelists on the implementation or the effectiveness of the 2025 budget, and there's three of them have raised the question of credibility. I wonder what your own perspective when you look at the assessment of 2025 budget.
Yeah, of course, credibility arises from experience. If you have budgets 1 year, 2 years, and you see that there's a huge gap between what is appropriated and what is implemented, of course, it only follows that the level of credibility will begin to diminish, which is what we have with the budget process. So there's a major issue, and I agree with the position of Sheung and Professor Adedipe, and of course the accountant, the erudite accountant, that budget is all about assumptions. If your assumptions are not credible, you can't build something on nothing. So the whole problem arises from the fact that we have not been, adopting realistic assumptions for the budget, and that is why we are where we are. Look at the instances of all this padding of budget, increasing the budget arbitrarily, increasing the revenue basis arbitrarily by the National Assembly. All those arbitrariness have contributed to all this problem. So it's a question of how the quality of assumptions are, and I think that is where we should focus on. And all the expectations from government revenue agencies, the MDA is what we call independent revenue. Historically, that thing we have never met what is expected from the government agencies that are supposed to rate. So these are the basic issues. I think we need to be frank with ourselves. We need to be more realistic in assumptions, and that is the way I think we should go.
To Mr. Nibide now, because you started this issue of credibility of the budget and the assumptions. So we saw the parameters there. What do you think should be considered, or what perspective should be given when considerations are being given to these parameters? As we saw there, for this year, 2027, it was assumed that the price of oil will stay at $75, and we've seen that hardly happen. Oil production, we're struggling 1.6, 1.5. Exchange rate, we are celebrating almost 1,500. GDP, I think we hit that, and inflation. But what perspective do you think should be given? We've seen the parameters for 2026 too, so we don't end up in the same boat as have this kind of discussion again by this time next year. Mr. Nibide, please.
Yeah, thanks so much. I feel like we have to first look at the non-oil side, because we have to agree that our budgets had significantly been funded by the non-oil component, and I mean the federal government budget in recent times. Out of the around 20 trillion naira that the federal government had in 2024, around 9 trillion was from the non-oil. By the time you even adjust for the special levies and the other expenses, like maybe you would even get to around 13 trillion naira. So it's very, very realistic that the federal government has to understand that it's a non-oil that can significantly drive things down. I guess that's why they're going for this tax reform that will kick in early next year. The other thing also you have to look at is ramping oil production. There's little we can do around oil pricing, and we have to also be realistic with oil pricing, because now we're around $55, $57 per barrel. And then, so the MTF that was passed, the National Assembly is still in discordant tone. The House of Rep is favoring 64, the Senate is favoring $60 per barrel. So I'm sure they were going to find a midpoint at some point. But the reality is that we need to realize that we have to be a little bit more conservative when it comes to oil production numbers. And the reason why we always tend to overlook that number or to overextend ourselves is the deficit management, which means we want to make sure that we have a respectful deficit in the budget assumptions. But you cannot spend what you don't have, and which is why I talk about we need a lot of capital efficiency on the side of the federal government.
What does Mr. Onivide, what does capital efficiency look like, or what does it sound like?
I mean, it's just about prioritization of capital expenditure and focusing on what matters more to expand the country. If you dive into the budget and you break down the capital expenditure, you find 10 million, 20 million, 40 million naira project. You would assume that the federal government is trying to be a local government. You have constituency project. The last budget, National Assembly inserted over 7,000 projects in the budget, worth close to around 8 trillion naira. So if you look at it technically, there's so much. We have not been able to ring-fence the budget to focus on what matters most. It seems like everybody just wants to insert whatever they feel into the budget and believe that that's going to fly at the end of the day once it's passed into law. So the federal government also has to be able to say we have to narrow down what matters most so that we can fund what is most important on the side of the federal government. Because we have more money going to states now. The tax laws are more generous to states than the federal government. But despite that, the federal government still has to fund UBEC. As counterpart funding, it still has to take a portion of its revenue for the BHCPF, for the health, which is the primary health program for the states. So the federal government also looks like it's not taking care of itself enough in the revenue matrix of the country. So my own view is there's a lot of need for a lot of capital efficiency that is anchored on planning. Now it seems that the federal government just says, everybody wants to put whatever they want in the budget, and at the end of the day, nothing gets to delivered or executed. That's why we have this cascade of rollover of projects, because we are trying to do a lot on the capital side, but the revenue numbers are not matching that. So we say, okay, let's wait 6 months. And let's wait a year more, and let's wait a year and a half more. And at the end of the day, we have this lopsided budget that does not even make sense at the end of the day. So which is why the federal government has to go back and tell its MDs, its agencies, and its politicians and its National Assembly, let's efficiency and conservatism drive our fiscal assumptions. And let's make sure that the capex that we are going to invest in are the things that matter to the Nigerian people or are within the remit of the federal government.
Dr. Adekpe, let me ask you to please follow up on that. The issue of capital efficiency, and Mr. Onivide said that it's like the federal government is not taking care of its own responsibilities more, as sometimes the federal government tends to behave like the local governments. And now we have the tax reform that starts in January, which obviously gives more revenue to the sub-nationals. What are your thoughts on these lines?
Very good. Now, one thing I want to add to what Shim said is that when we talk about capital expenditure, we often forget that in the mix is purchase of vehicles, purchase of furniture, purchase of office equipment, all right, which are also capital in nature. And of course, it can be a large number when you look at across all the MDAs, that is ministry, departments, and agencies of government. So then, another dimension I want to bring forward, if you look at the execution of the budget, it will seem like the revenue generated more or less matches the current spending. So which leaves very little space for capital spending, all right, as it were. Now, the reason for that is because the current expenditure is frontal, let me put it that way. Because if you miss anything in that area, it can spell trouble for the entire economy. Unfortunately, like Shehu said, we cannot drive growth unless we make room for capital formation. And that is where efficiency comes in. So what are the drivers of growth that we expect? So what do we need to do in terms of funding those drivers to create an environment for the kind of sustainable and inclusive growth that we desire? So more attention, therefore, to be on priorities, as Shehu said. We need to get our priorities right and then ensure that resource allocation matches our priorities and we execute accordingly. Those are the things I would add to what Shehu has said. Very, very important for us going forward as a nation.
So, I mean, before we leave the 2025 budget, let me come to Dr. Yusuf now. I want us to rate the implementation that we perceive, that was done on the 2025 budget. So let it not look like we're just on the negative side. We saw the inflation targets. I think we're doing better there than even expected. We saw the GDP. And then we also had infrastructure like the Lagos Coastal Road, which I shared at the beginning of the program. A guest who was coming into the studio earlier this week said he did 20 minutes from Ajah to Victoria Island because part of the coastal road. So we see things like that. Dr. Yusuf, how would you rate the implementation and effectiveness of the planned spending for 2025?
Well, the implementation effectiveness cannot be rated as very good, even going by the account even of the minister when he said that 70% will be rolled over. I think for the few things they have done, of course, we must appreciate those few things. But it comes back to the credibility of the whole process. If you are presenting a budget, those who are stakeholders within that budget ecosystem must have some trust that this is a budget and this is our expectation from the budget. So the bigger issue comes back to the fact that when there is huge disparity, and the disparities are quite huge between what is presented and what is delivered at the end of the day. And let me also emphasize, and I think Dr. Adedipe also made the point, this is essentially about capital expenditure. If you look at the implementation performance for recurrent, perhaps you'll be talking about 90% or even more. So we don't have much issue with the recurrent. The bigger issue is with the capital, and it's about the realism of the revenue realism and realism about expenditure. So the few things that have been done, of course, we can acknowledge the impact that these things have had. But what is important is that we want a process that is much more credible. Then secondly, I need to also stress the effect of debt servicing. The debt servicing pressure on our budget is extremely very high. And debt servicing is first line charge.
Yep.
Whatever you want to do, you have to first service the debt. Even from this current MTF, we have debt service accounting for almost 35% or so of the revenue. And at the end of the day, the revenue target, the percentage of debt service in the budget as a bit of revenue will increase. So it increases to around 60%. So when you have that kind of challenge, and you have the challenge of, just as Shehu said, capital efficiency, the way you now use your influence to be able to get your location, and you also have the problem, even the bureaucracy around procurement, even for the little that is available, the budget that you go to be able to implement capital project is another labor thing, which also needs to be reformed. So these are a question of factors that we need to take into account. We need to manage our debt better so that the pressure of debt on our fiscal space will be much less. Right now, it's extremely too high. So those are the issues that I will relate to as far as that is concerned.
Percentage, what would you give the implementation and efficiency of the 2025 budget? Just the percent.
Okay, is that for me?
Yes. We want to start with you.
No. No, it can't be more than 20% or even less.
20%.
I mean, from all the evidence that we have had, I'm talking of capital now, because we need to distinguish between implementation of recurrent and implementation of capital.
Okay.
The conversation now is about the capital expenditure. I'm not sure it's up to 20%. That is why the minister himself is talking about rolling over. 70%. That is why the president has sent in another appropriation act, repealing the 2025 act and 2024 and enacting it, to ensure releases of over 40 trillion.
All right, Dr. Yusuf. All right, Dr. Yusuf, I also want to ask Dr. Adedipe, what would be your rate, your percentage rate, if you were to rate the implementation and efficiency of the 2025 budget?
Maybe I look at something around 27%. And why is that so? My reason is simple. If so far, as the Minister of Finance and Coordination of the Economists said, we've been able to do only 30% and have to roll over 70%, I will discount that by 10% and therefore score it 27%. That's where I'm coming from. So we're not too far from what Dr. Yusuf said. Anyway.
You know what Mr. Nibide will give? I hope it's not 15%.
If you look at the MTEF,
you said?
If you look at the MTEF, the revenue itself has not performed well. But let's even start from the expenditure. The recurrent, as at July this year, was around 97% performance. So which is also tracks with what Dr. Muda said. The MDA's capex was just 8% performance. That was as at July this year. And by the time you look at it from an aggregate perspective, you had GOEs, grants, and all of those things, they used to buffet it. You have around maybe 23%, which is also very close as a. So I don't think we're going to achieve more than that, even as of now, because the law of push has been going to the 2024 capital expenditure. And I think our own perspective has always been, if you don't execute a project as at the end of the year, stop and start afresh in the new year. Whatever is left, prioritize it, mop it together, and make it a supplementary bill. Then you introduce that supplementary bill into the new year. There's no reason why you sign the budget in January and you don't present another supplementary bill in February. There's no law against it. So that you know that what you are running concurrently is a modified or a revised version of the budget you just signed.
All right.
It's not just going to be another entirely that will around 2024, 2025. It's so lopsided and it gives room for gross abuse of resources.
So for you, 23%, Mr. Nibide.
You are not funding it.
For you, 23%, I hear?
Yeah, 23%.
23%. All right. Okay. I just wanted to get that. Mr. Adeoye will be in the studio after this break. Please stay with us. We'll get he made it. So we'll get his own percent of the implementation and effectiveness of the 2025 budget. But let's take a short break and we'll be back. Please stay with us. welcome back. It's still that special edition of Business Morning where we're looking at the budget. And thankfully, we have one of our guests who was on the road, Mr. Adeoye. You made it through the traffic.
Yeah.
Thank God. Hope it was not too bad, though.
Terrible. Terrible traffic.
I think Lagosians are traveling a whole lot.
Yeah. It borders on reckless driving and then the need for more alternative roads.
All right. So, I mean, while you were coming in here, I did ask all our other panelists for their rating of the efficiency and implementation of the 2025 budget. I won't tell you what they said. What's your own percentage and why?
Okay, I think I had them. I joined online. Again, when you talk of rating, you need to look at value for money. Remember, Sheun was talking about somebody woke up somewhere and just felt, let's double the budget. 2022 to 2023, and then 2023 to 2024, and then 2024 to 2025, have 59 trillion total expenditure. I would say, in all sincerity, what is the value of those implementation? If a project is going to cost you 10 billion naira, and then you spend 20 billion, so my rating is already dropping by half that way. So that 30% is 15%.
So for you, it's 15%?
Yeah.
Oh my
15%. And then we need to sit down carefully. I had Sheun talking about the need for us to stop carrying over budgets. It doesn't make sense. Rolling over. Appropriation Act by the National Assembly. In fact, the National Assembly, they are also culpable. Even though they are not going to be happy that they pass a budget and then it's not being implemented. But the question is, how come you added 10 trillion to that budget? So you need to look at the items that are there. Furnitures, somebody bought furniture last year, you're buying another one this year. So how are you going to count that as performance in the budget? So value for money. If something is going to cost you 10 billion and then you ended up spending 20 billion, that's why you're unable to meet up with that performance. So we need to now become realistic. The president needs to now become like a police, monitoring the figures and ensuring that somebody do not get money for lesser value.
So, Mr. Adeoye, let me start with you. I mean, we're looking at the 2026. We're talking of credibility. We're talking of actual performance, and we're talking of being realistic. So it all starts with the parameters. And so for 2026 now, we've seen the parameters proposed for the spending. We've seen oil price benchmark between 60 and 64. We've seen oil production 1.84 million barrels a day, exchange rate of about 1,512 for a dollar, GDP growth rate 4.68, inflation 16.5. Do these parameters look realistic enough to give us a budget that can actually be implemented?
Subject to certain conditions, because when you have parameters, now you need to take certain action to ensure that these parameters, they work for you. Last year, which is 2025 now, when you're talking about 2026, what were the parameters? Why did you miss it? Now, in terms of parameters dealing with tax revenue, the Federal Inland Revenue, which is now going to be Nigeria Revenue Services, they are performing. They've been able to meet up with their collection. So you then look at the oil production. What happened in 2025? Why didn't you meet up? Could it be that you've been too optimistic and then you didn't meet up? So then you discount that and say, okay, my intention in oil production last year was this. Now I need to do something. Don't forget that the war between Russia and Ukraine is ending gradually. And so your plan that you'll be able to sell crude to certain countries in Europe is also going to be affected. So we need to now be, a little bit careful and ensure that the conditions that will make the parameters to work, they are in place. Now, the issue of inflation, you then look at what are the factors affecting inflation? What are the things that we are importing? Now, I am not happy that we are still having a dollar exchanging at over 1,500. I was expecting that the government will now bring that to about 1,350, 1,400. So these are issues. And then it's important to have consultation. Meet with experts. All of us, some of us, the panelists today, we can also take part pro bono without collecting any money. And so we brainstorm, Sheun, Prof, everybody, and Mr. Dr. Muda. We can brainstorm together and say, look, this cannot work. Therefore, let's bring this figure down a little bit. And then all the projects that you intend to do. Look, the recurrent expenditure, are you hearing anybody talking about their salaries? So it means that we're performing in terms of recurrent. Now, do you have the people you have as employees, are they really needed? Do you really need all of them? The various training programs that have no meaning, do you really need all of them? So these are areas where you need to cut down, and then you have the right parameters.
Let me come to Dr. Adedipe now. Talking about making the 2026 budget realistic, we've seen the parameters, the proposed spending, 1 trillion naira for statutory transfers, 8.2 for debt servicing. You talked about debt servicing the other time. Recurrence, which it seems all of my panelists agree, it's the spending of that is not a problem. Proposed at 11.2. Capital, which is the core of it, for 2026 now, proposed at 22.2 trillion naira for Capital Expenditure and Development Fund. Do these numbers added to the parameters, do they look realistic? Do they look like we will have a more realistic budget in 2026?
So far in the course of the discussion, I will say no. And my reason is very simple. Every major assumption in the proposal stands on some variables. And of course, because this budget is also built around assumptions of crude oil production and price, it means the first place to start is the international oil market. So what are the sentiments there? What are the expectations of experts and analysts within the oil space globally? Where do they expect the average price of crude oil to land in 2026? So most of them are pointing directions at variance with the figure we have in our budget to start with. Even where we say Nigeria's born in life, for example, is a premium crude that commands a higher price than the Brent and some other crude types in the market, the point still remains that, like Sheun said earlier on, when we are budgeting, we need to be conservative. So for me, therefore, the price assumption of crude oil should be dampened. That's number one. Then production. If you look at production of crude oil around the world also, the first consideration is the number of rigs that are active. How many are they? Nigeria has been around 41 rigs that are active, for quite a while. So what are the prospects that that number will increase in 2026 so that we produce more? So we don't see that clear prospect yet. So when we take this into account, it means that we should be a little bit more conservative when it comes also to our oil production. And then, of course, as Dr. Adedipe said about the exchange value of the naira, again, there are 12 variables we look at when we want to form opinion about where the exchange value of a currency will land. So a good number of them today are quite, comforting for Nigeria. So why should we pick at 15-12 naira to $1 when what we do in our own outlook variously? Everybody on this panel does an outlook on the economy. When we have an outlook for the Nigerian currency for 2026 that is stronger than what is proposed in that budget. So it means then that everything we see around these assumptions is necessarily contrary to what we see the international market that we interact with and say about them. Let me drop this finally on this particular note, and that's the fact that I won't mention names, okay? But in the conversation on this budget so far, I read something that somebody in the House of Reps commented on, that, if we drop the price assumption, that will create deficit. So in order to avoid creating greater deficit in the budget, let's keep the assumption on the price of crude oil at this level currently. That for me is not, it's not just academic now, but it's a complete variance in how you arrive at a realistic budget. With this ab initio, we are designing a budget that certainly won't be able to implement. And that's what I see here.
Dr. Yusuf, what are your thoughts when you look at the parameters, the proposed spending for 2026? Do we have a more realistic budget?
Well, I agree with Professor Adedipe. We need to review some of those parameters. The oil price, I think you should bring it down to $60, and I understand that is what the Senate is looking at. $60 will be more like it. The second point is also about the oil output. Oil output at 1.8 is also not so realistic, because in all of this, we need to relate to historical trends. What was the actual average last year? That should guide whatever, assumption we are taking on, for the following year. And if you have an excess, of course, we can always adjust, to spend more. But being conservative and being realistic, I think is a very, very critical thing. And again, I must add, this idea of the National Assembly blowing up the budget, arbitrarily increasing revenue targets, arbitrarily increasing the budget, constituency project, and all of that, we should have a rethink around it, so that we don't have a situation where we have a budget that is almost dead on arrival. So that is, and finally, I must also emphasize the issue of the impact of debt servicing on our fiscal space. This underscores the need for us to watch carefully issues of debt management, because the pressure of debt servicing on the budget is enormous. It's crowding out a lot of things. It's making the budget very difficult to implement. I think these are the things that I would say around, ensuring that you have a much more realistic 2026 budget.
All right, Ms. Onikbide, I would like to get your thoughts if you see a more realistic budget in 2026, or what could be adjusted to make it look more realistic.
Thanks. I'm more concerned about this repeal act that the federal government has proposed and reenactment of bringing back around 43 trillion naira, maybe to mainstream, also streamline the capex. I worry about that. We're not still taking enough lessons in that. But I feel like in 2026, the pressure has to be on National Assembly. National Assembly has to understand that they cannot continue to adjust. The federal government is way off in terms of assumption already. By the time it gets to the National Assembly, you know that you have now much more complications. So my pushback is, let's be realistic. I mean, the assumptions needs to be realistic, from the oil price, the production rates. We also have to push the non-oil revenue lines a little bit more. In the 2024 budget, all of the revenue, non-oil revenue, that customs, CIT, VAT, they also passed their target by 147%. I mean, by 75%. There is a reason. We have to, or maybe we're not pushing them hard enough. So maybe, and if you put it out in dollar terms, it's not as if we have significantly grown comparatively. So we also have, I think there has to be much more aggression in terms of the expectations from customs, CIT, VAT, and independent revenue of the federal government. Because I feel like with much efficiencies in those environments, the federal government can just unlock more. Big problems by Dr. Muda Yusuf around debt servicing costs. We also have some Eurobond payments due, I think, in 2027, which means that you are going to see significant spike again. My push is that the federal government has to have some very realistic conversation on debt management and debt planning, because it's taking the entire fiscal space. In 2024, we spent around 16 trillion on debt servicing costs. We were around almost 65% in terms of debt service to revenue ratio. So something is still not balanced in any way. So federal government has to have significant conversations itself. And also, so I feel realistically, capital sector efficiency, as much as possible, putting more aggression on our non-oil revenue target. I think that would unlock a little bit more for us.
Right. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your time. Really appreciate it. And, we have here in Channels Television, we have a special program at the end of the year, the last 2 days of the year. So I know we will continue some of this conversation. So thank you so much. I'll start with you, Mr. Onigbide, Mr. Shea Onigbide, the Chief Executive Officer of Budget. Thank you for your time on the program. We appreciate it. And then Dr. Adedipe, who is now Professor of Practice at James Hope University, teaching economic policy, but we know him as the founder and chief consultant at B. Adedipe. We'll not forget that. We have it behind you. So thank you so much, Dr. Adedipe, and for representing over there in the UK. Of course, we have the Chief Executive Officer of the Center for Promotion of Private Enterprise. We apologize for the troubles you have to go through on the way, and you couldn't get here at the end of the program, Dr. Muda Yusuf, but we truly appreciate your contribution to the program. And then, of course, right here in the studio, started on the road, but made it right here in the studio, Mr. Benga Adeoye, founder and principal partner at Benga Adeoye & Co. Thank you so much for your time and going through the trouble to get here in spite of the traffic. Thank you so much, gentlemen, and thank you for also being a part of it, watching right there. Of course, without you, we have no audience, and there'll be no use to have this conversation. President Bola Tinubu is expected to present the 2026 budget to the joint house of the lawmakers later on today. Stay here on Channels Television, and you'll get it live, and of course, conversations that will follow. I'm Ini John Mekwa. So glad to have been able to do this. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.